Well, first of all, I was worried that I would be entering a war zone, because that's the kind of impression you get when you read the headlines about the Ukraine. 2 days before I arrived, there was a warning from the British Foreign Office that I received on email, which said that British citizens are advised not to travel to eastern regions of the Ukraine. Dnipropetrovsk is an eastern region, so I was worried. Then I looked in more detail. I found out it was Donetsk and those areas further east. However, if you are American, you have been advised not to travel to Ukraine at all, as far as I understand. So this is just to give you an idea. When I arrived, I felt more relaxed than I do at home, partly because of the wonderful hospitality shown to me by Rabbi Kamenetsky and Mr. Bogolyubov. And I had a really very pleasant experience here. While I understand that there is a lot of uncertainty and concern, genuine concern here, there is not the panic that I expected to find. And actually, if I think about it rationally, why should there be panic? Because if you think it seems unlikely, actually, that Putin is going to invade. It seems unlikely on a rational basis, although obviously people should be prepared. That's clear, and it's right to prepare for any eventuality. So yes, the difference between flying here and being worried about what I'm going to find, and the fear I'm going to find, and perhaps Russian helicopters flying overhead, was completely dispelled when I arrived. There is a lot of fear in the West about what is going to happen to Ukraine, but there's also a lot of ignorance about exactly what is happening on the ground right now. Obviously, there is uncertainty everywhere, and I think Ukrainians and people outside share that uncertainty. It's very difficult to get a good impression of what's happening in Ukraine, because a lot of propaganda comes from the Russian media, and that feeds into our media. So I could first say that it's difficult to really understand what is happening. But I will also say that people are genuinely concerned about what is happening here, and I would say even more so at the top level, at the governmental level, and at the military level. People are following this very closely. Only yesterday, President Obama said that if Russia goes further into eastern Ukraine, there will be severe consequences for the Russian economy. And I think you can believe that. I think that's that's a credible threat. Whether you believe that the US should be intervening militarily is another question, and that's something you can discuss. But I certainly believe that the EU has been less decided than America, and less forceful in its reaction to this situation. But I can see that the European Union and the US are united in their determination to make sure that Russia does not act without realizing that there are consequences for its actions, and there will be consequences for Russia's economy. So I think there's certainly there's a major awareness. This is important for the world. This is also a Cold War narrative. So there are other narratives in this story that are more relevant to the West than the situation of the Ukraine individually. But I can say you're not alone. You're not alone. This is the biggest story, really, of the last month. The most serious story that has played in the media in the West. I would like to correct the impression that you often get from headlines of newspapers in the West, which is that Ukraine is a fundamentally anti-Semitic country, because I've come here and I've found that you can go and be in fact, it's easier to be openly Jewish here than it is in London. I think people here are more confident about their Jewishness than in London. So that's quite a surprise, a very pleasant surprise. I mean, I'm very impressed with the involvement of the Jewish community with non-Jews, and this is also unusual. It's not unique, that particular aspect, but it's unusual. The London Jewish community is more typically segregated into different denominations, and there are certainly events, and some British Jews are very, very integrated. But here, it seems that you are very Jewish, but at the same time very integrated as well, which is an unusual combination. the biggest impression that I get is the coherence and the togetherness of the Jewish community in Dnipropetrovsk. You have this incredible community building that was founded by Mr. Bogolyubov, and there's a wonderful sense of sharing the benefits of the community facilities within the city, and not just between Jews, but also people in the city. So I think that this center is actually unique in the world. In fact, it's certainly unique in the world. It's something that you can't find in Western Europe or in America. So it's the connections between different kinds of people, different kinds of Jews who are happy to work together and to come together and pray and get married and learn in the same space, and that's something very unique. The difference between the Ukraine and the West is that, of course, here you have, in many ways, you have more freedom to be Jewish, and this is what I was going back to what I was saying before, that you have a much more coherent Jewish community because you can create it as you want it, and you have, of course, in the wider Ukrainian society, there are less controls here. There's more freedom to be what you want to be, even though there are other threats. But in the UK, we have regulation and heavy governmental control and interference, and we have courts that are constantly making rulings about what is allowed and what isn't allowed according to European law and according to British law, and then that becomes a serious matter in our country. I would say there's two main topics of discussion, or let's say three actually. The first one is what's happening with the peace process in Israel. This is very, very significant. We are at a very important time in the process, and we are at a point where everything could fall apart in a matter of days or weeks. There could be no more peace process, and many people have big hopes for Israel and the Palestinians, and not just in Britain but outside Britain. So this is a major matter of concern. More immediately, there are some big stories domestic stories that are making headlines. For example, the campaigns against Shechita, religious slaughter, that is growing in some political circles and some non-governmental circles. What is seen by Jews as attack on their way of life. Also, there are campaigns against the Brit Milah, because some people in the West and some non-governmental groups and even some politicians are saying that this is against human rights to carry out circumcision. This is actually a European-wide campaign. It's not just in the UK. Also with Shechita, it's also European-wide. So there is a general feeling and frustration and anger that the Jewish way of life is not being respected at some levels in government. Well, first I want to say that Jewish life in Britain is good. We don't have as you can see from my comments, we have campaigners who are maybe producing concerns in the community, but in general you are very free to be Jewish and to practice and to enjoy your life. And Britain is a rich country, so people generally have good lives. But I think the biggest, to answer your question more precisely, the biggest difference is that because the British context is maybe more comfortable in general, because it's a richer country, there is less coherence, there's less togetherness in the community. But here Jews, I think, need to stick together more and to rely on each other more. So there's more interdependence here, so there's a kind of economic and social interdependence here, which creates a more powerful community and a more bonded community. In Britain, the community is more spread out, less interdependent, more segregated, more fractured. So, for example, the Hasidim live in their side of town, and they don't really talk to the people of other denominations. And likewise, the secular Jews don't really have so much dialogue with the Reform or the Progressive, and they're all in their separate boxes. So here I find Jews are more willing to participate, no matter what their kind of Judaism is.